Conceived in 1919 and built in the 30s, the War Memorial Gardens were designed by Sir Edwin Lutyens. They commemorate the sacrifice of all Irish men and women who fought in Commonwealth armies in the First World War. Now magnificently restored by the Office of Public Works, they house a unique record of those who gave their lives in the conflict.
What we're looking at here is the record of 8 volumes of the names of those known to have died, Irish people known to have died serving during the First World War. And it is an extraordinary achievement to have completed these 8 volumes in a relatively short space of time, with all of the service details of each known person. And they managed to accomplish this between 1919 and the end of 1922.
And magnificently engraved by Harry Clark, no less.
Yes, indeed. These volumes really are special. It's wonderful to see this work, and each page has its own particular set of engravings, so the work on Clark's part alone must have been absolutely massive.
Strangely, the Memorial Gardens were never officially opened, a victim of hardening attitudes and world events.
De Valera, in principle, agreed to be in attendance at the official opening, which was finally to have been on the 30th of July 1939. And then, of course, conveniently or not, the war or threats of war intervened, and so it was postponed indefinitely.
The gardens fared no better in later years, falling into shameful decay.
Over the period 1965 to 1985, it was in an appalling state. It was vandalised, and even at the far end of this park, a section of it had been leased to Dublin Corporation, who placed a rubbish dump on it.
But painstaking work by the trustees and the OPW have restored the gardens to their former glory.
This is a great tribute to Lutyens' skill as a war memorialist, as it were. I mean, his other great works, of course, his most famous work is Thiepval, the Somme War commemoration at Thiepval. But he also did, of course, the cenotaph in Whitehall. And this is in the first rank of war memorials to be found anywhere in its beauty and simplicity.
And for those whose forebears fell in the conflict, an oasis of remembrance.
I defy anybody to go around here and look for a symbol, a cannon, a rifle. No, you'll find a rose garden. You'll find green grass. You'll find peace. You'll find silence. You'll hear the birds singing. It's a place where those people who lost their sons, their loved ones, could come, can still come, and reflect on the madness of war and reflect on their losses.
The checkered history of this memorial park over the last 70 years reflects the undulations in the relationship between the two islands. The hope is that Queen Elizabeth's presence here, though, will send a sure and conclusive message of reconciliation.
Here in Islandbridge, President McAleese and Her Majesty the Queen will stand together, will be a symbol of reconciliation, and will tell the people of Ireland, and indeed the people of the world, that the war between Ireland and England or Britain is over.
David Davenport, RTE News, Islandbridge.
So that is where the Queen is on her way to now as we speak. Our correspondent Tommy Gorman is at Islandbridge for us. The dignitaries and others have gathered. What are we expecting over the next half an hour, 40 minutes, Tommy?
Prepare for a half hour very heavy with symbolism once more, Brian. The Queen and President McAleese are due to arrive here at 12 o'clock on the dot. Political leaders and other dignitaries have been gathering since 10:30. You'll have here the leaders of all Northern Ireland's political parties except Sinn Féin. Members of the Orange Order from north and south, former loyalist paramilitaries, members of military organisations, veterans organisations, representatives of the different nations who have embassies here in Dublin. And watch out for the wreath that the Queen is going to lay. She's going to lay a poppy wreath soon after she arrives. The President will lay a laurel wreath. Afterwards, they will visit those two houses, one with the book containing the names of the 49,000 plus people who died fighting in the First World War, Irish citizens. And then they will go to another house where there's a cross that was actually made from wood used in the trenches. It's called the Ganshi cross. Interesting too, Brian, that some of the dignitaries here include the Mayor mayor and deputy mayor from Messines in Belgium, where the Queen and President McAleese went together in 1998 for the inauguration of the Peace Tower in what was a very, very important occasion in this journey of reconciliation. In relation to that, I suppose, reopening of the story of the Irish people who fought and died during the First World War.
Well, you can see there some of those who have gathered for this ceremony. Those are retired members of the Irish Defence Forces. They're wearing the blue berets of the United Nations, signifying their United Nations service.
That's right, Brian. You have veterans who served with the United Nations. It was interesting to see, I suppose, the people from Northern Ireland who have travelled here. Peter Robinson, Northern Ireland's First Minister, a DUP leader, is here. He'll be going to the banquet tonight with the other Northern Ireland leaders, and my understanding is his wife, Iris Robinson, will accompany him to that function. Here too, Tom Elliott, the Ulster Unionist Party leader who got into some controversy during the election count in Omagh. He's here with his wife Anne. David Ford, the leader of the Alliance Party, and Margaret Ritchie, the leader of the SDLP. I spotted two representatives of the four main churches, including Cardinal Sean Brady. Interesting too that Paddy Hart from County Donegal, who along with Glenn Barr from Derry was so instrumental in that Messines occasion back in 1998. Paddy Hart is here too. So the journalist Owen Harris, he's among the guests. I think he's the guests of one of the guests of the Irish government. And you have representatives of the diplomatic corps. David Cooney, the Secretary General of in Ireland's Department of Foreign Affairs, he has quite an interesting background. He was actually brought up in England. His father was an Irish emigrant. He was Ireland's ambassador in London for several years. He's now Secretary General in the Department of Foreign Affairs. So for somebody like him, today is an emotional occasion. You'll see as well people who lost loved ones during the First World War, and people who also served in the Second World War, people who have links going to, say, regiments like the Irish Guards. So this is quite an occasion for them. And given that the Queen is going to come here, that you're going to hear the British national anthem at this location, you're going to hear the Irish national anthem as well. You'll hear one of Moore's melodies, often the Stilly Night. You'll hear the Last Post. It's only going to take half an hour, this ceremony, Brian, but it's going to be so full of symbolism, just like yesterday.
Well, as was alluded to in David Davenport's report a moment ago, this is a place where you won't see signs of militarism or the martial tradition. It's a place of peace and of tranquility and of reflection. Those two rose gardens at either side are on an east-west axis. One catches the morning sun and one catches the evening sun, and that's designed deliberately to echo the words that are often spoken on Remembrance Sunday, the words of the going down of the sun, and in the morning we will remember them.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Brian, that Mary McAleese, who is a Northern Catholic, who was, her family, they were burned out of their home in North Belfast during the Troubles. She, I suppose, she has taken an initiative over the years in relation to the First World War, that unspoken history.
Very good, thank you, Tommy. We now see the arrival of the Queen at the entrance avenue to the War Memorial Gardens, and we're going to hand over now to our colleague John Bowman. John.
And here comes Queen Elizabeth II to this historic occasion, the Irish National War Memorial Gardens, which, along with the Garden of Remembrance ceremony yesterday, is at the heart of this visit. The President and Martin McAleese are first to come out of their car, and presently the Queen will arrive with Prince Philip. The dome-shaped, this is the lime avenue leading to the War Stone of Irish granite, designed, of course, by the great memorialist Sir Edwin Lutyens, who had already landscaped and designed several sites in Ireland and across Europe. And he found this a glorious site. The sunken Garden of Remembrance surrounds a war stone of Irish granite, symbolising an altar. It weighs 7.5 tons, and dignitaries here from different ranks, different ex-servicemen's associations, those who are veterans of different armies, and all marking this occasion. Peter Robinson there you see with Brian Hayes in the foreground of that particular shot. Her Majesty the Queen will arrive, be received, as indeed the President is now being received, by Lieutenant General Sean McCann and General Officer Commanding 2nd Eastern Brigade Brigadier General Dennis Murphy, accompanying Martin McAleese. The history of this Memorial Gardens and the extraordinary history of when it was built, when it couldn't be opened, when it was delayed, when it fell into disrepair, all of that captures in a way one of the problems of commemoration in Ireland of the Great War. Michael Noonan there and Phil Hogan greeting the President and Dr. McAleese. For all the men who fought in the War of Independence, for each of those, 16 fought in a British uniform in the Great War. And yet, as Professor F.X. Martin wrote afterwards, there was a sense of national amnesia. They were the forgotten. They returned home, not to a country fit for heroes, as they were promised, but to a country in the throes of changing its mind, having a war of independence, and then the treaty, and then the Civil War. And the money to commemorate their efforts in the Great War had already been collected, and how would it be spent? There was a suggestion that the memorial should be in Merrion Square, that it should be in the Phoenix Park, that it should be in Stephen's Green, that Nelson's column should be pulled down and something. Anyway, it was finally agreed that this was the site, and Edwin Lutyens found it a glorious site and did, as you will presently see from the wider shots, an absolutely magnificent memorial garden. And he was already engaged, of course, in a number of other buildings in Ireland. He was married to an Irish woman. He's the architect of the Cenotaph in London as well. At one stage, I know he was doing Liverpool Cathedral in the mid-30s when he came over to inspect the work, which was rather slow. It was done by really, in a way, I wasn't quite say by hand, but heavy machinery was not used. It was considered more appropriate to employ former soldiers, and the work was done in a labour-intensive way, in a quite deliberate labour-intensive way. And here you see the final laying out of the gardens. Various groups, the Inchicore Ledwidge Society in honour of Francis Ledwidge, the war poet who died in 1917, the Irish Red Cross, United Nations Veterans Association, the Royal British Legion, of course, the American Legion, Military History Society of Ireland. All of such groups are represented, as are regiments, former regiments, indeed some regiments that no longer exist as regiments but are regimental associations and reunion groups. Connaught Rangers Association, the Irish Regiments Historical Society, Leinster Regiment Association, all gathered here for this important ceremony today. Gerard Breen, the Lord Mayor of Dublin, there in the foreground. And in the background there, the gentleman with the hat there at the back is William Harvey Kelly of the Royal British Legion. All of the ranks of the army and the services, of course, represented. You see Alex Atwood there in the second row, Minister now in the Minister for the Environment in the New Northern Executive. Peter Robinson is here, as are other party leaders from the new executive. And awaiting now the Queen, who will be accompanied by Prince Philip again on the second day of her visit to Ireland. Very close to here, here comes the Queen now. The impact which one of her forebears made in Ireland, George IV, gave us King's Bridge, that was built specially for his arrival just across the road here to bring him across to the Phoenix Park. The Lewis line goes across it now. And he, I think, was also responsible. He stayed in Dublin for some time and greeted everybody on his walkabouts, which were regular. He greeted them all not as Paddy or Mick, which was the usual jargon at the time, but as Jack, and I'm not certain he didn't actually give the name Jack Keynes to be the name for a Dubliner. Queen now arrives for this very important part, because associated with the Garden of Remembrance yesterday, this forms in a way a multiplier. The two ceremonies capture the two traditions in Ireland, and as I was saying, the way this particular tradition was forgotten when there were so many, 49,000 died in Irish men died in the Great War, and this was here to commemorate them, and was finally really only opened in 2006. It was used from 1940 the first time, but had been built 1 or 2 years before, and there were various delays. Finally, it was to be opened on the last Sunday in July in 1939, and other events in other places quickly overtook that with the outbreak of World War II. And of course, those who died and fought in World War II are now remembered also on the Great Cross here. So Her Majesty now comes up to be greeted near the cenotaph. And as yesterday, she was greeted by Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Sean McCann. And there will be a leaf-laying ceremony at the heart of this, with both anthems, as of yesterday. So much of what happened yesterday will be repeated. General Officer Commanding 2nd Eastern Brigade, Brigadier General Dennis Murphy there.
Already got a morning's work done now here. Thank you very much.
Being briefed now by the President.
I hope at least just know about last night.
And Dr. McAleese.
I introduce you to Minister Noonan.
By the Minister for Finance, Michael Noonan, on behalf, and Phil Hogan on behalf of the government. Phil Hogan, as Department of the Environment, of course, that department has broad responsibility now under Dúchas for these gardens, which are now splendidly maintained and will be in perpetuity. If I go on this side, I think that we're right. It's pretty similar to yesterday. The flags on parade will be the tricolour, the Union flag of the United Kingdom, and the 3 divisional flags of the British Legion. Captain Joe Freely is now inviting those already present to stand for the entrance to the Memorial Gardens of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. She's being brought now to the cenotaph. Diplomatic corps here, representatives of the churches, the judiciary. And this will be the first occasion that Her Majesty, who will know Lutchen's work very well, but this will be the first time she has seen this particular memorial garden. When Lutchen's came in the middle 30s, he was very pleased. He sent out for the masons and for a 16-shilling bottle of whiskey, spelled EY, I may say, as well from his notes. He shared it with 3 from the OPW, 6 masons. We finished the bottle. Captain Dennis McGorty now from the Cadet Honour Guard. Wreath Lane will be next. Members of the Diplomatic Corps. John Murray there, Chief Justice, behind Her Majesty. Wreath bearer Corporal Derek Brunt will now present Her Majesty with the wreath. Corporal Michael Kelly presents Uachtaráin Heron with another wreath. There will now be 1 minute silence. Off to the stilly night, the lone piper Sergeant John McGuinn. When I remember all the friends so linked together I've seen around me fall like leaves in wintry weather. Some of Thomas Moore's lines to Sir John Stevenson, who is of course Dublin born, and that was his arrangement of a Scottish air. Next, the last post, bugle call. opposite band joined the Army No. 1, the Southern Brigade Band, and the Western Command Band for this royal visit. The flag officer is Lieutenant Philip Quinlan, will hoist the national flag to full mast to the accompaniment of a drum roll. Then the reveille, it borrowed from the French army, just as the last post was borrowed from the British army, both now part of the music protocol in the army here. This will be followed by the national anthem. Next, the Queen will be brought to the granite rooms. There are 4 here representing the provinces of Ireland and part of Edwin Lutyens' great architectural plan for this garden. In one of them, and I think the President is explaining this now, to the Queen, in one of them there is a roll of honour of all those who died. See Cardinal Brady there in the front row, Cardinal Sean Brady. Beside him, Monsignor Owen Thine, Army Chaplain. These rooms have the books of the names of each man who died, 49,400 names of those who died in the Great War. Since then, of course, the 1939-45 has been added to the cross. But essentially, this is in memory of the Great War. And right across the whole of Europe, of course, there are memorials of all kinds to those who died in that extraordinary event. And the manner in which it has been remembered is itself now an area of great scholarship and interest to historians as to how the memory of that time has been remembered this is Brigadier General David O'Murrough of the British Legion. He will explain to the Queen. And she's now entering the granite room here to see the roll call of honour you saw in part of David Davenpar's earlier report. Harry Clark, great stained glass window and artist, was responsible for the engraving on these pages. But many of those whose names are here, their great-grandchildren are probably watching this program and don't know that their names are there, because these were forgotten men. This is my point earlier, that F.X. Martin called this a case of national amnesia. The history was really rewritten, not remembered. And all of the extraordinary history of these gardens, their manner in which they were, that this site was chosen. We've no microphone there, so I'm not denying you any access to what's being said, but the manner in which this particular site was chosen, and then the manner in which it was forgotten, itself forgotten and not opened, and all sorts of difficulties arose. And finally, in the mid-1980s, a decision was taken to restore it, and that became part of the reconciliation. And this is a very big moment in all of that. And now Duchas, the heritage organisation within the Department of the Environment and Heritage and Local Government, is now in charge and will be so in perpetuity. David O'Murrough is, of course, president of the Royal British Legion in the Republic of Ireland. And those names, by the way, in that book are now available online. There's access for those interested. And they represent, I mean, among the names there, of course, would be Tom Kettle, who died at the Somme, and who famously wrote in the poem a day or two before he died in wiser, to his daughter, whom he had never met, "In wiser days, my darling rosebud, blown to beauty proud as in your mother's prime, in that desired, delayed, incredible time, you'll ask why I abandoned you, my own, and the dear breast that was your baby's throne, to dice with death. And oh, they'll give you rhyme and reason, and some will call the thing sublime, and some decry it in a knowing tone. So here, while the mad guns curse overhead, and tired men sigh with mud for couch and floor, know that we fools, now with the foolish dead, died not for flag, nor king, nor emperor, but for a dream born in a herdsman's shed, and for the secret scripture of the poor." And I think that captures why so many fought, and they believed they were fighting for Catholic Belgium. They believed they were fighting for the freedom of small nations. They certainly believed they were fighting for Ireland. But confusion followed all of that, and they came back to a country which couldn't decide how to remember them. There was Remembrance Sunday, of course, right through the 20s, and it was often a controversial occasion. And the Queen is now going to be brought to another of these granite rooms, where the Ginshy cross, which originally was carved by the survivors of the Irish soldiers in the Somme. It's a Celtic cross, and at the Somme, 4,354 died. And that cross was used just east of the Wellington Monument for many years, right through the 20s and 30s, as the cenotaph for those who were being remembered. It had originally been erected on the battlefield of the Somme, and although the Germans took that territory afterwards, it was there, they left it alone. It was there in 1926 when it came back to Ireland, replaced there by a Grand Cross. Major General O'Murrough is explaining Lutyens' plan, I think, to the Queen. She would be very familiar, of course, with Lutyens' work. because he was a great memorialist, and she will have visited very many of his sites and his memorial gardens. But this is considered one of the finest in the world in this style and this genre of architecture. She's now moving to the other granite room. And I see General Sir William Hickey there, his photograph just up there on the wall. He was one of, she's signing the visitor's book, and he was one of those who was responsible for nursing these gardens. First of all, he brought Lutyens in on it, and persuaded him to be interested, but he was one of those who managed the funds, and who, there's the photograph of the cross just behind Prince Philip's head, who managed the funds. That is the original cross now. That stood in Ginchy. It's repaired now. The Germans left it alone. You can see the shamrock at the top, and was used as the cenotaph, erected and then brought back into safe custody just east of the Wellington Monument in November every year between 1926 and 1939, and then from 1940 this building was used for that ceremony.
With some of the money for the war memorial, they decided to erect 3 granite crosses. This one was
It was carved out of an oak from a ruined French outhouse on the Somme battlefield. And as I said, the Germans left it standing even when they retook that ground, and it was repatriated to Ireland then in 1926. I'm sure this is what the Queen is being told.
and that's the purpose. That's why that Ginchy cross is brought back and is kept here.
Brought back and kept here. Yes, unfortunately we're not allowed to have sound there, but if you can lip read, or I think we heard just off mic, as it were, something of what was being said to Her Majesty. And Martin McAleese now will also be signing the book. And this is an important day for Martin McAleese. Well, he has taken quite an initiative in the peace process himself, and is responsible for bringing some of the UDA in from the cold, as it were, and into the peace process. He is from East Belfast. He was burnt out, his family were burnt out in the Troubles. And Jackie MacDonald of the UDA, you possibly saw him earlier, commander indeed, brought down to lunch in the Oris with 60 of his fellows. Bust down in 2003, I think it was, and brought in, and here on this occasion he might be introduced later on. He's at the back of the crowd. Somewhere here. Peter Robinson, First Minister in Northern Ireland. Party leaders Margaret Ritchie, Tom Oliver of the Unionist Party, David Ford. Martin McGuinness declined on behalf of Sinn Féin. Now the Queen is being introduced to various people who are special guests here today. Dr. Ian Addison of the Somme Association in Belfast. There's Mary Hannafin, first Irish minister to lay a wreath at the Somme. The Burgomaster and Deputy Mayor of Messines in Belgium. And the Burgomaster of Heuveland, County Council of which Messines is the town. And they have welcomed Ian Addison is of the Somme Association, and a group there with him, the Memorial Gardens Management, Dennis O'Sullivan, who's the head gardener. Dr. John McCullen and Margaret Gormley are also there, very much in charge now of Entail with some rain. I think the umbrella can be the signal of that. Her Majesty now, a very busy second day And some of the UDA group there, Jackie MacDonald and James Birch, Royal British Legion and British Service Families Group, and Kathleen Rogan here, who is 98, served in the Nurses Corps, and Kevin Myers, their journalist and prolific writer on this subject, here as a guest, I think, of President McAleese. And Kathleen Rogan worked nursing corps in World War II. The military history group, regimental associations, the Irish Guards, Captain E.J. Cooper, Tom Burke of the Dublin Fusiliers, Irish Military Heritage Trust, Major General P.F. Nolan, and members of the Irish United Nations Veterans Association. And that really concludes this historic visit to the Irish War Memorial. Full of symbolism and full of interest, I'm sure, too, to see that cross and its history. It captures so much of the Irish effort in World War II, in World War I, I should say, and also, of course, the 1916 was the date of the Battle of the Somme, and that's an important date and would be quickly remembered north of the border, and would have a resonance there which would be different to that of Easter 1916 among nationalists. So in many senses there are two 1916s in Irish history, and both to be remembered very soon in terms of their centenary. And no doubt there will be equivalent ceremonial occasions when that event comes. But this is really the most important moment in the history of this extraordinary Memorial Gardens. There's no question about that. There was a very important commemoration of the 90th birthday of the Somme, and that was indeed when the gardens were officially opened. Some 80 years after they were thought of, and some 75 years after they were built. And they were ready for opening mid-30s, but they didn't finally open until 2006. And now the Queen departs down the Lime Avenue from this very important and historic visit to the Garden of Remembrance and the Memorial Garden in Islandbridge. These two parts of her wreath-laying ceremony, both national anthems played, and that is really at the heart of this visit, these two parallel ceremonies of yesterday and today. More history later today, of course, when she will be visiting Croke Park. There was even a question in 1939, when it was to be opened for the first time, the question of whether, since it was an all-Ireland park, whether the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland should be invited, Lord Craigavon. But that didn't come to pass, and whether he would have come would be another question. There's so much history and so much complexity in the story of the Memorial Gardens themselves. Very nuanced, and there are the two wreaths, which were the wreath of the poppy on the right by the Queen, and to commemorate those who died in British uniform, Irishmen, in the Great War and in World War II. We now hand you back, this is John Bowman, handing you back to Brian Dobson.